Thanks for having me.
Thank you.
Well, the takeaway from that is that international clientele, it will grow here in West Michigan, and I think as already confirmed with the introduction, the U.S. is a nation of immigrants. That trend continues. At least our group, and Andy can attest to this, we've been very busy last year and even at the beginning of this year with foreign nationals coming in. Most of our practice is on the employment-based side, but on the family-based side as well, you'll see opportunities to help that foreign national, international clientele settle here in West Michigan. I'm glad to hear that we have quite a bit of experience already in the room in dealing with international clients and relocation issues. So I certainly want this to be an interactive discussion and not just a lecture per se from me. But even now, we still see a number of calls, not so much from the realtors, but from the lenders. And from our employer clients, especially the smaller companies that don't have as much experience with international relocation. There's still a lot of lack of understanding or mystery behind immigration. The various alphabet of options and limitations on the initial time frame seem to cause some concern, especially with, at least from what I've seen, fairly tight lending standards. So what I want to do today is arm you perhaps with some additional legal foundation. We're not going to try to make immigration lawyers out of you, but give you that perhaps an enhanced foundation. What is an e-visa? What does it mean that there's a 2-year or 3-year term on this visa? How can I overcome either a seller's concerns or a lender's concerns and help navigate that process so that the settlement here in West Michigan gets off to a good start. That's enough of that disclaimer. But and some of the key things here, and this is why I'm glad to meet with all of you, because even though Andy and I are typically one of the first contacts from our employment clients that they have a new manager coming over or a key hire, a leading transplant surgeon, for example, that one of our local facilities is anxious to get on board. The visa part's only half of it. The other half is getting them settled here in West Michigan, and so all of you play a very key and critical role to making sure that resettlement, that relocation starts off well. And so I'm glad that we had a chance here to talk. We're still seeing, and from a realtor standpoint, I would think this would be a good to hear. We're seeing heightened demand for physicians. Michigan, we're hearing the word crisis as far as our shortage of physicians, and if you do the math, do the demographic studies, it certainly is a crisis with the number of physicians that we're short for our population. But across the board in the medical field, a few years ago we certainly did a lot more in the manufacturing sector, but that demand has certainly continued with physicians, physical therapists, they across the board of professional medical professionals, and they're good paying fields, so higher priced housing. Engineers, IT professionals are also in high demand, and we just don't have enough native-born U.S. college graduates in those fields to meet demand. But again, housing, settling in the community, when you look at what goes wrong with a foreign assignment, international assignment, the inability to settle properly in that new location is always up there amongst the top. And from our client perspective, we want to see not just the immigration piece fall into place, but we want to see that long-term settlement work. And as a West Michigan native, I very much like to see our clients grow and those operations become successful. And the housing is really critical. 2 years ago? Yeah, 2 years ago. I guess I shouldn't complain because it got me more work because they bring in an executive. But it actually was the third general manager for a company, a German-owned company. And I'm not blaming the realtor because they actually did what this client asked them to do, but just to give you some insight how key this is. So we had those of you who've been to Germany, it's much more denser population. So the executive came over with the spouse. They started looking at housing and how much a larger house they could get for their money, how much more land that you wouldn't get in an urban setting in Germany. And so they bought this beautiful home not too far out of the city, but far too isolated for the spouse to relocate to make connections. So the 5-acre, 5,000 square foot home, as beautiful as it was probably not the wisest relocation decision, because it just led to isolation and the spouse saying, I don't have any friends here, enough of this, I don't re-up, and we did 2 more visas before we actually found out what went wrong with the other ones, and they got them a condo in town and a vacation home on a lake, and everything's going well. So just to underscore how important all of you are to those relocation issues. So issues that we still hear from our employer clients or the international executive, the new position, well, some of the issues that come up and how they come up. So it is true that, especially with Europe and many of our major trading partners, because of treaties and trade laws, there is relative freedom to travel for business people, at least to get here, even without a visa. But that relative freedom to travel is really for temporary purposes. So sometimes that can lead to confusion. Same thing with students. We are seeing now an increase in foreign national students coming over, and that's really dealing with the educational system and the student visas. But those students are going to need to transition to a longer-term visa, and that's the work that Andy and I do. And if they start off their career right, of course, you're going to be looking for housing. The longer-term stays, employment, are all going to require visas that authorize both those issues. And there is timing issues, and the timing, for the most part, has gotten longer, despite some efforts with the Obama administration. We're still seeing what we say a very adversarial adjudication climate. Many of the visa requests that we would say would be routinely granted a few years ago, we're having to go through either formal or informal appeals, often to convince the Immigration Service to grant the visa. So the timing issues can be a bit exacerbated in the current climate. So yes, time is needed, and with those timing issues, this can be an added complication for where all of you may be involved. We're seeing folks that, if they have school-age children, want to make sure that they're finding that home, come summer, so that the kids can start properly in the fall. And so we'll see even housing purchases scheduled for prior to that school year, prior to the visa even being issued, because they want to get housing established. So sometimes those drivers that I found a home, I found a school for my children, even if the visa is going to be delayed, can we proceed? And often the question, or the answer to that question is yes, but then another opportunity for some risk to arise. Yes?
You have in the third bullet, employment authorization. Is that something that has to come from the employer in the U.S., or is that something that is generated in their home country?
The employment authorization is part of certain visa classifications. So the point I'm trying to make there is we'll see there's actually permitted activities or permissible activities that individuals, business people can engage in without a visa. Most of the Europeans are under the visa waiver program. It was a pilot program. The pilot designation's gone. It's an ongoing program. So 90-day period of stay, they can come in. Right now we're dealing with a foreign national, happen to be a group of German investors. They're going to open up a new facility outside of Grand Rapids here. And so they've been using this visa waiver program to look for a commercial site to meet with. It's a tool and die operation. They have a client base in Europe that's saying we need the same support from you in the U.S. Michigan in particular, fortunately for us. So they're able to travel back and forth, engage in these preliminary activities, but when they open the doors and are really performing services here, they need a different visa classification, or they're going to get stopped. Visa is going to be canceled, or a stamp's going to go in there that they've worked without authorization. So that's what we're talking about, a visa with work authorization, and that is by that classification that comes with it.
Thank you.
So some of the visa issues, again, relate to the ability to travel back and forth. And here in Michigan, we see a lot of Canadians under NAFTA and just general immigration laws. Canadians have fairly easy travel ability here in the U.S. And Canadians certainly can buy vacation homes here without a work authorizing visa. But those issues do create some complications. And so we often have to educate how they have to handle those border crossings when they see or answer a question honestly, do you own a home in Michigan? You're traveling here frequently. Well, yes, I do. And well, you're not a permanent resident. We're not going to let you do that anymore. So those issues are coming up more so when we're in a down economy. But even the current recovery hasn't really. That message hasn't necessarily been relayed to the guys at the border, guys and gals at the border. It's not just men. So some of these issues that come up, especially in the real estate area, that we still see fairly often. Some of this may come up when the buyer openly, acknowledges or mentions that they have a temporary visa, or when asked for identification documents for mortgage approval, it's evident that they have a temporary or a non-immigrant visa. Sellers, certain mortgage, even fairly sophisticated mortgage banking operations, still have a lot of confusion over, well, if that visa term is that limited, should we even be lending to them? So we're going to talk about how those concerns can be overcome, and perhaps how all of you can play a role in overcoming those issues. So we'll see, buyers that have restrictions. They have a visa that's either limited to a period of time, or it's limited. Most of these visas are limited to the petitioning or sponsoring employer. What does that mean? Should that affect a mortgage approval? What is an employment-based visa? People get confused or concerned over that. Valid immigration status. Even in the news this morning, I heard, I'm an NPR listening, they talked about expansion of a deferred action program, which is not really an immigration status, but legally it has many of the same benefits as a true immigration status. Certain states, fortunately not Michigan, in recent years have attempted to pass laws to, you could say, encourage the undocumented populations to leave their state, especially when you have a downturn in the economy. You see that kind of legislation passing, especially in the South. And there are, in very isolated instances, in fact, very fact-specific patterns, certain risks that those who aid or abet an illegal alien or undocumented worker did get in trouble. But for all of you, we'll talk about this more. That's something we really shouldn't worry about at all. But yes, you can find in the news reports of landlords going to jail, but there's more to those fact patterns. So we'll kind of dismiss that myth. So the law does, on that point, the law does prohibit encouraging or inducing an alien, a foreign national, somebody without proper documentation, to come and reside in the United States. But you have to have intent behind that. So your role as a realtor, unless somebody's paying you, 10 times market value, and wants a home on the St. Clair River with dock access, it's nothing that you're going to worry about. Yeah, yes.
I just want to bring up an issue because I do a lot of reading about immigration law. And a year ago, the Supreme Court did make a ruling that, and I'm happy to pass it to anyone that sees it, that it is actually against the law to prohibit people from gaining access to housing. So the Supreme Court said that any person should be able to have access to housing. So they did uphold that ruling, and Arizona did try to fight that,
right.
But it was not accepted, and the Supreme Court did uphold that it is not aiding and abetting to rent to people that don't have legal status. So
Yeah.
I just wanted to verify that.
And normally, we're by no means recommending that your role as a realtor is to investigate immigration status, but often it's just on the table. I mean, it's nothing to be hidden. You'll have a new general manager for this German company, and you're getting the call that we have a new general manager from Germany. We're working with Immigration Council on the visa, and they want housing. So it's not that we're not advocating that you do an investigation per se, but these are issues just that are out there. And if they're applying for a mortgage, the normal documentation that for a mortgage application, it's going to reveal that. So those issues are just often out there, and what we're trying to do is help you overcome them, without having to go through extraordinary measures. Often we're seeing, international banks having to be involved, and that really shouldn't be the case. Or we had one client that was getting frustrated with a very expensive home purchase, and it was a privately held company, and the owner just said, fine, I'll write you the check, and we'll have the lawyers draft up a loan document, because we're not going to delay your housing and delay the start of the purchase, so that your kids can get here and have a home and learn the neighborhood and learn the kids. And to me, this is a guy who's making close to $1 million a year, a long history. If I'm a lender, this seems like a great one for me, but they got hung up on the visa issues and the pending visa status and just didn't quite know what to do with it. To me, that was a great loan event, but they didn't. They lost out. So, just kind of moving on. So the timing issues. The visas can take a while, and we're seeing them take longer than we had in the past. Hopefully that will be ameliorated soon, but we're still seeing some timing delays. And the timing can be anywhere from, if you go by normal processing times, typically a 3-month processing time is normal. Certain visa classifications allow us to pay the federal government $1,225 more, and they'll adjudicate within 15 days. But sometimes their adjudication is just to ask for more documents and kind of delay because they're backlog. But a 3-month process is not unusual. And for certain visa classifications, we're seeing even more of these. Religious workers, for example, will see a 5 to 6 month minimum government processing time. And with our religious worker visa classifications, our government's worried about fraud, and so they will have to do an on-site visit. That essentially prohibits us from doing much about that. But again, we have people that want to get here or want to get settled in and find a home much quicker times than that. So you'll also see issues with transactions with certain foreign nationals that by religion won't borrow money, and there are certainly ways to overcome that, because from a religious point of view, it's the payment of interest. So if you have a land contract for a set amount spread out over a certain period of time, that, at least for the ones we've dealt with of the Muslim faith, has not violated their religious belief of paying interest, because they're not paying interest. I mean, it's in reality built in, but there's not an interest calculation from a religious standpoint. If the purchase price is $400,000 and it's a 15-year term and they're just monthly payments, that's acceptable to them.
Making a discount for prepayment?
Yeah, because it's not an interest payment. But yeah, so I think understanding that you may have those quote tools in your toolbox per se can obviously be a significant advantage to helping those buyers. So. Some other ways to answer these issues. If not just my office, but if qualified immigration law attorneys are involved, we're very used to writing letters to lenders, letters to sellers that confirm this visa is pending. It's our legal opinion that all the criteria are met. It's just a matter of time, and that has been successful in getting it through the underwriting process. In fact, Andy's so adept at that. He's wrote a couple of those letters when I've been on vacation, and it didn't even take him that long of time to do that. So that's again, we can, without being overly lawyerly, put it in understandable terms that this is a process. The lenders can get back then to their normal evaluation of income history, employment history, and proceed. Most lenders are pretty good about this, but it does depend on the visa classification. Many of the employment-based visas that my office deals with, that most foreign nationals will utilize, have a 3-year term, but not all. And we'll come to this later. DACA, the deferred action for certain childhood arrivals, DAPA, deferred action for certain parents of U.S. citizen children. Those have a 2-year time frame. So sometimes that 2-year versus 3-year time frame can be a challenge, but it shouldn't be. Most of these visas, they met the criteria once. That's the maximum that the law allows. A 3-year term, subject to renewal. Sometimes in 3-year terms, sometimes in 2-year terms. It's just how they wrote the law. An immigration status, a specific immigration status here in Michigan and by federal law is not required. So we have no affirmative obligation as a realtor, as a lender, as a seller or seller's representative to acquire or confirm that information. There's no such law that requires that we verify immigration status. So I've already mentioned a couple of these, and I think it's helpful if you all know at least a little bit about what typically you may run into and what does that mean. These are just paragraphs of the Immigration and Naturalization Act. We have paragraph B, subparagraph 1 is for business visitors. And so individuals will go to the U.S. consulate in their home country. Often these visas are for 10-year increments. Doesn't mean they can stay in the U.S. for 10 years. It just means they don't have to go back to the U.S. consulate for the next 10 years. And that allows them to, B2 is the class of tourism. Sometimes you see B1/2. So the consulate has said that they agree that Jamie Starner is going to be granted this 10-year classification. He can come to the United States for the next 10 years. Now his stay, a legal stay, is different than the visa validity. So with the B visa, for example, even if Jamie doesn't mind us picking on him, has this 10-year visa, I'm sure he'd be granted for a 10-year visa, at least from my earlier discussions with him. When he arrives in the United States, they're going to look at, why are you here, Jamie? How long is your itinerary have you here? But at most, they'll grant a 6-month period of stay. So his period of legal stay is going to be 6 months, or if he says, I'm here for 2 weeks, and then I'm getting out of here, it's too cold, they would maybe put a 30-day or 90-day, kind of depends on that officer. So there's the authorized stay in the period of employment. So B visas, business visitors, tourism, and pleasure. The E class, we're seeing a lot more of these. And these are for treaty traders or treaty investors. The U.S. has to have a certain type of trade agreement with the country of nationality. Germany happens to be one that we do have a treaty with, and we see a lot of use here, at least in West Michigan, for these treaty traders. If the company is an import-export business and trading between the U.S. and the foreign company, it would be a trader class. If, like my recent example from my meeting a week ago, where we have 3 foreign national investors from Germany, we're going to be opening up a new tool and die shop. They're investing in the U.S. That would be the treaty investor classification. Tonight at 7 p.m. I get to call Australia about a new Australian E3. They're 13 hours ahead of us. E3 happens to be classed for certain specialized occupation professions from Australia. Essentially a job that requires normally a U.S. bachelor's level degree or higher would qualify for this E3 class. And just by lobbying efforts and business interests saying we need more visas for Australian nationals, we have a special visa for Australian nationals. So you'll see a few of them. Maybe one more if I can convince them to come tonight. H-1Bs are a commonly used visa. We see these frequently used by the foreign national students transitioning from their F1 class visa to a longer term stay, and that typically they would use this H-1B. The H-1B, again, has that, you'll see there's a bit of a theme here with our immigration laws, a bachelor's level degree or higher on an area requiring specialized knowledge. So heavy use by the IT field, heavy use in the medical field, heavy use even in the finance field. We've actually done H-1Bs for banks and mortgage applications, mortgage companies for financial analysts and the like. So H-1B visa holders commonly used. We'll talk a little bit more about H-1B visas as well today. H-2Bs, you're probably not going to see a lot of that in the real estate world because these are temporary and seasonal, and they mean that. And by law, they have to be less than 1 year. Now, we will see H-2B workers that come to the United States year after year. The hotel and restaurant industry heavily use the H-2Bs. They typically will get a group of workers at once. There's an H-2A category, which is for the agricultural world, or agricultural sector as well. H-3s, we're seeing many more of the H-3s. I don't know how many of them are dying homes because they do by regulation have to go back home. It truly is meant for a temporary stay, but you still may see them looking for places to lease as well for an 18-month or even a 2-year period. Exchange visitors are a broad category. There's heavy use of this J1 category in the medical field. J1s are commonly used by physicians for a residency program or a fellowship. J1s are commonly used for faculty at colleges and universities for guest faculty. Non-degreed students fall into that as well. So your non-degreed student may not need housing assistance, but your guest faculty, your medical researchers, it's a way for researchers from around the world, and we're seeing a lot more of that even in West Michigan, coming to do a 2 to 3 year stint, sometimes longer, in the research field. And many of these are highly paid professionals, so good opportunity for some real estate. Intercompany transfers. From what we're seeing, what our main client base is in that employment-based area, and even here in West Michigan, we deal with a lot of international or multinational companies. They will use this L1 intercompany transfer visa option frequently. If there's a category for executives, there's a category for mid-level managers, and there's a category for what they call specialized knowledge workers as well. So slightly different criteria than the age. So the international companies will use these frequently. And there's even a pretty good path to green card or permanent residence from that category. So the L1's one you want to star or underline because that may be a good client base for you. O1s, aliens of extraordinary ability, as Andy can attest to because he's written a number of these supporting letters, briefs, and even appeals successfully, I should add. We're seeing a lot more interest and use. Part of it has to do with a cap, a quota on the H-1Bs that limits those that are available. But there is something for aliens of extraordinary ability. We've used that fairly frequently in the last few years with internationally very prominent physicians and surgeons to build at some of the area hospitals. So good news for all of us because we're truly getting the best and brightest from around the world to help take care of all of us as we age. We also see those even in more unique settings. Andy helped out with a filing for a fairly young woman, fairly young in her profession, but very accomplished, for an interior design company who wanted this young woman who had won multiple awards in poetry and creative writing, but she also was an accomplished graphic and visual artist. So they wanted her not just to help with the designs, but to help explain why you should buy this painting or wall hanging in your vase, and she could say that far more articulate and persuasive than I could. So we're seeing more and more of these O1s in a variety of uses. Religious workers as well. We're seeing quite a bit of demand for assistance with the religious worker category, not just for what you may expect ministers, priests, and other more typical religious occupations, but religious schools will use them for teachers. And we've even done them for editors and publishers, because faith-based expertise was part of that. And they will also, they have a option by law of going on to a longer term stay, a green card or permanent residence. The TN and NAFTA, the NAFTA category. NAFTA, of course, applies to the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. Being in Michigan, we see heavy use by our neighbors in Canada. That NAFTA, the TN category, was changed to a 3-year term, gosh, probably 5 years ago. So there's an initial 3-year term where for the longest time it had been a 1-year term. TNs, unlike many of these, don't have a per se limit, but it is a true non-immigrant visa. Yes.
Who puts the limit on all these, or the time frame on all these visas?
Congress, by law. Congress and the president, when they enacted the
So all
laws.
of these could be, you could have, let's just say, a J1 exchange visitors, and one visitor gets a month and the other visitor gets 6 months.
Yeah, I mean, there's programs, they look at, well, how long is your study? I mean, if you're guest faculty, if you're going to be, teaching at Calvin, and however long their semesters and however long they want you there, you should be able to obtain that J1 for. Now, if it's, well, we want the professor here for 5 years, you can't do that with a J1 for faculty. So it is by category. So that's what us lawyers do. They say, here's how long I want the person, what's permissible.
What happens when those visa expires? And
Well,
you don't
We'll
get it
transition
renewed?
them to, ideally, we transition them to an appropriate longer-term stay with something that'll change categories. These are non-immigrant visas, or we'll move them into the green card permanent residence. So yesterday I actually met with a potential new minister. He's in Canada, or he's from Canada, visiting here. And that was his question. Okay, I can get a 3-year R1, then what? I have young children. My wife would like to go back to work. And we outlined the process that we get an initial R1 for you. And then there's actually a green card or permanent resident category. If you like the church likes you. Usually after 1 year of making sure we all like each other, this is a long-term fit, we move to that green card. If you overstay, we'll jump ahead a little bit, but if you overstay, you're out of status. You're out of status, you're among that 11 million or whatever that number is of undocumented workers or undocumented foreign nationals. So you're illegal. If you want to use the more harsh term, you'd become an illegal alien if you overstay your term. Good question.
John?
Yes.
The visas for an individual. What about the extended family? How many people can come along? They bring nannies? Do they bring whatever? What can come along with that visa?
Yeah, good question. Everybody heard it. We talked about the kind of the principle of the individual. What about the family? What about the spouse? Good question. It depends on the category. For the most part, the categories have a dependent subpart. Now, Bs don't, per se. I mean, you have to get your own B1, B2, but they look at the principle. So if you, Terry, were the one coming over, you're at the council saying, I'm looking at coming to Michigan to open up a new real estate office. How long do you need to be here? They look at your family, want to make sure it is your spouse, that these are your children. By children, they mean 21 and under. And they would get their own visas. If we were, skip ahead, if we were in the E1, E2 class, then actually it's the same number, it just one says spouse. So they just wrote a longer paragraph and included the spouse in the E1 and E2 class. And interestingly enough, and not to be political, but for the most part, Republicans, when they get pushed by U.S. Chamber of Commerce and business interests, have been successful in immigration reform. And President George W. Bush actually passed a law that allowed the E2 spouse to gain work authorization, because business was saying, we can't get the executive to come here. Many people have dual professional households. That's great that my new engineering manager can get here, but if his wife can't get a work authorizing visa, he's not coming. And George W. Bush heard that often enough that he actually fixed it. So it does depend on the class of visa. Some can get work authorization. My minister that I talked to yesterday or day before. I had to tell him, unfortunately, the R2 dependent has no work authorization option. She might be able to get a TN because she's a medical technologist, but separate visa, she's going to have to find employment first, get them to sponsor her. So these all kind of weigh into it. Yes?
That's what I wanted to address with a religious visa. There was a wonderful family that lived here in West Michigan. Their kids grew up and then they aged out of the visa. And because they traveled and worked in refugee camps all through Central and South America, their children were born in 3 different countries.
Oh, wow.
So one of their daughters had to go back to Honduras and one of their sons back to Guatemala, and then they had their daughter here who was not quite 18. But they did have to move, and their children had to go back. They would have been under the undocumented status, and it was before the DACA approval came through. So their daughter was like assaulted in Honduras, and they had to move to another country other than their parents here. But they had to live in Costa Rica so they could attend school. And
So that's a good example. Why do you have to involve lawyers in this immigration process? Isn't this something we could just ask the travel agent to do? Our laws are a kind of a myriad, mix-match, patchwork quilt, if you will. The Congressional Research Service a few years ago actually said that our immigration laws now exceed the complexity and contradictory provisions than the tax code. I mean, it's complicated. There's portions of immigration law that we don't even want to do because it's just too complicated. But the employment-based pieces we do. Yeah.
I do have one question, actually, or 2 comments regarding the e-visa. And it does say are used for those investing in a U.S. company. And if I recall correctly, you have to have a minimum amount of money, like 50,000, 100,000, or 500,000 to get it. And leads me to the next question. That investment needs to be in a company and cannot be made into real estate, correct?
That's a good question. I don't know if everybody heard it, but the E-class, it talks about investment in a U.S. company. And the part of the question was, is there a minimum amount that the investment has to be? And does it have to be in a company per se, or could it be, well, in real estate? So the E-class actually, by law, by regulation, requires a substantial investment. So there is no 6-figure. Most lawyers, including myself, will say the closer you are to an actual 6-figure investment, the higher likelihood of approval. But there is no regulatory or legal minimum. They kind of look at the big picture. What's your, will it create jobs? How are you funding it? What's the source? Who's making the investment? Is it an established foreign company, or is it 2 or 3 individuals that don't have that background? So substantial is the term, but in reality we have to be darn close to 6 figures. The investment for the E-class could be real estate. It required an active investment by the principal who are applying for the E-visa. So if you were, in our real estate example, buying real estate, refurbishing it, whether you're swinging the hammer and using the screwdriver or managing that process, you could certainly develop a business plan, and usually a business plan is part of it, that shows, well, I'm actively managing the investment. Now,
could you use the real estate for yourself, or would you need to found a company?
Well, you need a petitioner. So you have to have an entity that's petitioning for you. So we will often work with our business lawyers. Like with the German company example, we have the business lawyer quickly set up a new LLC, so they would have, because a company has to petition. So yeah, but if the example was that we have the foreign national professor from China, he likes it here, he wants his kids to go to this school, and he's going to buy some real estate for the student housing and as an investment. No, that's not an investment visa because he's not actively managing that investment, so that wouldn't pass the test. Does that make sense?
Yeah, thank you. And another comment regarding H2 visa. I think was a change that it can, because there was a question raised before, what if it expires? And I think it used to be possible that you could be extended, one, if you make sure that you do it prior to that your status expires. Of course, you
Right,
don't want to get
right.
into that situation that you're out of status. If you, so you could re-extend it, I think, 2 or 3 times.
Yeah, with the
And I think
H1,
this question was made before to what if after 3 years, I'm not done on the job, but it expires, so I think it's important to know if
Yeah.
somebody gets a question.
yeah,
that you can
let's get
let
to
them.
that H1B. So with the H1B, it's a maximum period of 3 years to begin with. And if all things being equal, the job's remaining the same, I'm still the IT manager at the company. I'm still making, they have to make the prevailing wage. So what normally is paid for that profession in the local market, they don't do national. There's data of what that job should normally pay in Grand Rapids. So if all those things have essentially remained the same, a 3-year extension would be readily available. But the general rule is 6-year maximum H-1B, not per employer, but as an individual. We'll just pick on Jenny. If Jenny has an H-1B for her first employer, now she changes employment, she has 3 more years available. They actually measure time physically in the United States, so we can recapture sometimes. So if Jenny took an assignment back in Ecuador, we could recapture her time in Ecuador. Even if you just vacation in Ecuador, we could recapture. Sometimes we'll do that. How often were you gone? We'll recapture the time. So with our generally, we rely on not memory but software. So we have immigration software that tracks all this. We get reminders out to everyone. So you're in year 4. You got 2 more years. Is this do we want to keep Jamie any longer? If we want to keep Jamie, we better get him into a green card or permanent resident status because he has 2 more years left. So I say general rule. It ties into we'll get to it, to the green card or permanent residence process. We still have law that's as old as I am now, the 1965 quota-based laws, that if you're from a country with high rates of immigration, India and China, you could start the green card tomorrow, and you're going to run out of H-1B time before you're eligible to obtain it. So instead of fixing the quota system, because that takes Congress and the Senate and the President all agree on it, what they did is they extended by regulation, where we didn't have to have an act of Congress and the President signing it, that, well, we'll give an excuse, actually it does go back to the DC 21, back to George Bush, to allowing 7th, 8th, 9th, and more if you got essentially your green card, your permanent residence underway. So I say 6-year limit. It is a general 6-year limit. If you started the green card, we can keep you here and renew your H-1B. Yeah.
Can you touch more on the quotas per country and the limits?
Yeah,
Because they don't really, there's a big difference between Europe and Central and South America.
Yeah, I don't want to jump too far ahead. It's in our slides. We're going to come to it because that is a valid point, Cindy. One that I think is not necessarily logical, so it surprises people, and it also drives a number of factors as well for planning purposes. So, just kind of going through. I already kind of mentioned this. What the J1 may be used for. One thing to keep in mind, which I guess it could be good because you can get somebody a visa, then they have to move. But another commission for you. The J1 for physicians in particular has a 2-year return home requirement. J1 for certain other highly skilled foreign nationals, there's actually something called a skills list, and you have to literally look at their country of nationality, what's their field, and there's a list that says whether or not their home country is short of certain skills. If their country is short of medical physicist, and I'm from probably Ecuador, would probably be on the list if they're short of medical physicist. There would be a 2-year return home requirement if that individual from Ecuador came on a J1. We'd have to get a waiver. The country of nationality, I have to say it's okay that the medical physicist doesn't come home. With physicians, not to go too much into detail, but with physicians, it doesn't matter what their foreign country says. U.S. law says you got to go back home for 2 years. And we passed that law when the AMA, American Medical Association, was fearful of the number of foreign nationals coming here. This was back in the 70s. Now it's the opposite. Now we're crisis mode in almost all of the states as far as the number of physicians. and we can only get 2 types of waivers, 30 per state. So we've
Wow.
created problems, and in 30-some years, we haven't been able to solve them. Just kind of moving along again, I kind of covered the L visa again. So L visas are a good client base for all of you, and they actually have a fairly good path towards the green card or permanent residence. Again, the O1s, you got a lot of high-end real estate, circle the O1s, because these are usually highly compensated individuals. The TN, there literally is a list of what occupations are covered by the TN. Again, no outside limit, but they have to have this intent to go back to their home country, be it Canada or Mexico, or we need to carefully time when they go for the green card and get them the green card or permanent residence. You may again, we may mention the H3. Well, now that the Griffins are in town, we do see P visas that just happen to line up nicely for professional athletes. The R1 for the religious workers. Again, you're probably not going to sell a lot of homes to H2 visa holders because the nature of that visa is they do have to go home. Same thing with the H3s. But if you run into those, that's what those are. So we've already talked about the green card. They are a shaded green again. It's essentially permanent residence or an immigrant visa classification. By and large, in the employment-based area, it's a 3-step process. We actually have to involve the U.S. Department of Labor. The U.S. Department of Labor has now an online, you can file by mail, but essentially it's an online software-driven program that the Department of Labor has, about 12 pages long, minimally for every applicant, that essentially requires the employer to show they first tried to hire locally, normal commuting distance, a U.S. worker, meaning permanent resident or U.S. citizen, who is minimally qualified that the employer could not. So if you were hiring, you want to sponsor a foreign national for your real estate business, it would be a real estate license. And you don't get to say, but Jamie's better. I know Jamie. He's he has all the skills. He has a proven track record. That doesn't matter. Are there any minimally qualified U.S. workers? Now they don't make us hire that minimally qualified person, but we can't get the required labor certification. So that's the hardest part of our task. And essentially, you employ lawyers to do what you have to do by law, get certification, when everyone knows we're not about to hire anybody who's minimally qualified. And we argue with the government over what are minimum qualifications, because no one hires minimally qualified people. We want to hire the best. But the government imposes this rule. So you use lawyers to get around that, or get through that. Look around it, we go through it. The immigrant petition is step 2, where the employer's signing documents and demonstrating we got the labor cert, or we have an O1 person, an alien of extraordinary ability, we get to skip labor cert. Or we have our international manager, we'll come to that, and we get to skip or avoid labor cert. So the international managers are international companies, they don't have to deal with that. They could, international manager, don't have to do labor cert. And there's a final process that's kind of like your old, Ellis Island newsreel clips, where a medical exam is still required. So even if Jamie's been here for 5+ years on an H-1B visa, he's still going to have to go through a medical exam by one of only a handful of physicians in the area, and make sure he's not a threat to U.S. society because of any medical condition, or actually mental health condition. And they fingerprint everybody. It's a very innocuous looking building on 44th and Breton. It's an application support center where they 10-point fingerprint everybody and photograph them and do a very, very thorough background check. Since 9/11, we thoroughly background check everybody. They make us reveal who your parents were, where did your parents live, every association of any kind, including religious affiliation, all the way back to age 16. These applicants aren't U.S. citizens, so that's not illegal to ask that they disclose every association or association-like organization that they've been a part of since age 16. That's apparently how we can tell who's safe to keep in our country. And yes, as Cindy had mentioned, we have this visa quota, immigrant visa quota, this country of birth quota. So we'll come to that. This is that adjustment of status. There's two ways of doing it: that background check, health screening, and immigration history. I shouldn't overlook that. So if our H-1B worker works without authorization, if we'll just pick on Terry here. If Terry had his H-1B worker for Westbrook Realty and decided to pick up some extra work at Keller Williams, well, his H-1B didn't say Keller Williams, so that would be unauthorized work. When he goes for the green card, they actually look at your tax returns, and they would say, all right, we see an H-1B visa for Westbrook. We look at your tax returns, and we see you got some income from Keller Williams. What happened there? And he'll probably have to pay the immigration lawyers a good part of what he made at Keller Williams back to get that straightened out, to get a waiver, if they agree to waive it. So a very careful immigration history is reviewed. And you can either do that stateside, where you literally are adjusting status, but you have to be in status. So if you overstayed your H-1B, you can't adjust from a status you're not in. If you're overseas, or sometimes it's faster, you'll just consulate process it abroad. This same process, by the way, some of you I know I met earlier, either gone through the marriage-based process or had children that married a foreign national and went through the process. This same process looks familiar to you because they went through it. The marriage-based petitions go through this. Nobody's exempt from that. So, the good news is you have the most thoroughly vetted daughter or son-in-law around. Yes?
That's true.
I had a question about permanent resident card. Once it's issued, because I had a mortgage application where someone was a permanent resident but it had expired by 2 years, so we couldn't offer financing. Is there an issue if they let it lapse for that long? I believe they were from Haiti or Cuba, so they never went through the visa to permanent resident
Okay.
transition. They were automatically a permanent resident, but is there any problems with getting those reissued at that point?
Yeah, just so everyone heard the question. The question is if they had someone looking to buy, and it was for the mortgage application that became the problem, where their permanent residence either lapsed or something happened where they didn't complete the process or it lapsed. We can talk about both fronts. Your permanent residence, the card itself is now either issued as a 10-year card or a 2-year card. The difference is, for most folks, once they get through labor, through the petition approval, through the background screening, it's a 10-year card. But it's really like a passport. The passport expires, but your citizenship doesn't expire. Same thing with the permanent residence card. Your card expires, so it's no longer a valid identification for travel. You can't go back and forth to Canada and re-enter the U.S. with your card being expired. You can't go to a new employer and complete the I-9 with an expired permanent resident. But they're still a permanent resident. They just don't have valid proof of that permanent resident status. So, but you mentioned Haiti and Cuba, which leads me to believe it may have been another problem where Cuban nationals actually have special provisions under law that if they set foot in the United States, they're protected. There's a special law for Cuba. Haiti, during the hurricane damage it had, hurricane and earthquake, there's temporary protected status for those individuals, but it's temporary. And if you don't take steps to renew it, assuming Congress does renew it, you would be out of status, so you'd be undocumented or per se illegal. So there is an affirmative obligation on individuals to maintain those statuses, and even in the first example, the expired permanent residence, although lenders really don't need to verify status if that's the only document they have, and now under post 9/11 laws that were well intended but had some unfortunate consequences. Driver's license, Michigan ID, almost every state, but maybe 3, requires proof of immigration status to renew or issue a driver's license. So if someone's status is lapsed, here in Michigan, they're having an awful hard time getting just normal forms of identification. In the absence of normal forms of identification, how are our lenders going to react? Not very favorably. So.
Excuse me, but I
Yeah.
have a question. You said that their card is expired, but they do not cease to be permanent residents. So how that, because they're only becoming illegal then?
They're
Permanent
undocumented
resident.
because they wouldn't have the document. So the question was, if their status expired, aren't they illegal? No, but I should qualify that. So if I have a 10-year card and I fail to renew my card, that's my situation. I've failed to renew my card. And there's a form you file, an application, you say my card expired, I need a new card. In 4 to 6 months, they'll issue a new card. They'll background check you too, to get your new card to make sure there aren't grounds for removal. So normally, all I have to do is pay a fee, renew my card. It doesn't matter if it was employment-based. I could be retired, I could be unemployed, I'm still a permanent resident. But the criminal history will come back into play because these individuals aren't U.S. citizens. So there's a whole set of different laws that say who's subject to removal or deportation based upon certain criminal history. And the criminal sanctions and the immigration sanctions aren't equal. So you have to look at what does the immigration law say about that type of criminal activity. Will this deport or remove the individual? And there's immigration law judges where we challenge that. Under Obama administration, we saw record removals because they would just run searches on easy databases. And we had one guy we helped out with a 1982 conviction for a small amount of cocaine back in college. Long-time married, successful businessman. They literally called him and said, "This is ICE, and are you so-and-so, and did you have a conviction?" He said, yes, and he was handcuffed by armed officers, hauled away, and
All right.
took us about a year, but we got it canceled. But and that's supposedly changed now. Now we're getting back to the executive. Part of that executive order was to tell ICE, Immigration and Customs Enforcement, to go after what we probably would all agree on are the true dangerous people in society versus people that have 20-some-year-old convictions and paid a fine and moved on in life. So we're supposedly back to removing the dangerous people. But so to clarify, so most people have a 10-year card. Their card expires. That's all. They have an expired card. They need to replace their card. Our investor visas, there are an investor visa class, green card class. They give them a 2-year card. It's conditional permanent residence. So, and there are minimum dollar amounts. We'll come to that. So if I write $1 million check, and it can be passive if you're in a regional pilot program, and Michigan is now one of those. We don't have anybody who's applied yet to the Michigan program, but we're a regional center. So you literally can write a check for $1 million, and that's all you have to do. Well, you got to pass the background check. You write your $1 million check, you pass your background check, your investment has to be shown, and it often is real estate. It's often mixed-use real estate. The Michigan's is really trying to follow Vermont. Had a very successful, it's called the EB-5 program, employment-based. It's really that creates jobs. Fifth preference program, and they built ski resorts and multi-use commercial settings. And if you wrote your $1 million check, and the regional center could show that you were part of a group that created at least 10 jobs, so it's $1 million plus 10 jobs, you've got your green card for 2 years. 2 years later, we check, how's that investment going? If the investment's going fine, it's active, you may lose money on it, but did you create jobs? We'll take away your 2-year card and give you the 10-year card. So there is that type of, that's the green card or permanent residence investor program. Not the E.
But you could not lose that status after 2 years, after you have
You
invested.
You could. It's
You
conditional.
could put the money in and they say, well, the rules changed, for example.
Yes. And we had lawsuits
Bad luck for
about
you.
that. Yes. And that's why it's so, I think last count there were 68 approved regional centers. And I haven't checked in the last couple months. But last time I checked, maybe 6 of them actually have a track record of going all the way through. You know, many of them, it's who wants to be first in line. No one's done the Michigan one yet, because if someone's calling me and saying, I have $1 million, I want to get my green card, I mean, I can tell them, hey, Michigan has a program, but no one's done it yet. Or Vermont has this beautiful ski resort, and they've done several hundred of them. Which are you going to go for? Most often you go for the proven track record. So we're a step one here in Michigan. We've got this regional program approved by the federal, by the immigration authorities, but we don't have anyone who's gone through it. So that's probably another longer term class, because all of you, especially if you're in commercial real estate, could be on the ground floor of helping Michigan get its first group of successful applicants through. That temporary resident, just to finish that line of thought, so that temporary card, yes, you could lose it, and then you're out of status. You have more problems, just my card expires, you're out of status. Same thing with the marriage-based case. If you've been married for less than 2 years, if you pass the background check, and even with Terry's approval as the new son-in-law, you could still lose your permanent resident status if you don't file what's called an application to remove conditions on residency. So you don't have to necessarily be married, but they will ask a lot more questions if you're no longer married. And so typically it's a joint filing. You will lose it, though. They'll lose the status if you don't timely file, and have a lot more questions to answer as to, well, why didn't you file timely, and what's going on with your marriage. So, there's a question in the back of the room. Yeah.
Hasn't Snyder, with what he's been doing, really trying to push that EB-5 thing along? Because I've been talking to different people about those programs for 4 or 5 years now.
Yeah, he has, and really, to his credit, it is a designated regional center. So, you know, step one, we are approved to do these applications. So what we need to do next is get the actual investors to say, I have $1 million, here's the business plan, here's what we're going to do. But so yeah, the groundwork is laid, and that was largely through Snyder and his administration's efforts to get that.
A lot of the stuff was the restrictions. You had to set up a district, and it had to be in an area where there had been job loss.
And they kind of revamped that whole program. They revamped and have implemented who's even adjudicating them. We actually finally have people who, I don't mean to be hypercritical, but I mean, these are projections. And so you really need an economist and other people that are in a position to look at a business plan or look at a real estate development plan and say, yes, this makes sense, this is likely to be a viable or to be successful. Where early on, you know, us lawyers were having to do all this education to an immigration officer who may or may, I mean, you know, we'd be thrilled if we got someone who had a business background, a business degree. Most often we didn't. They had no, you know, we're educating them on the law and on the business plans, and now they've revamped that, where instead of us having to always hire outside experts and pay expert fees to economists, the Immigration Service has its own now in-house group of experts. So we're in a better position than we were before. And yes, Michigan is a designated center, and it's statewide. It's not.
Oh,
it's,
okay.
Yeah,
That's
so.
huge. That's
Yeah.
huge.
It does matter where. If you're in, I don't want to spend the whole time on this investor program. That's probably maybe my third free lunch, I guess. Where if you're in a targeted zone where you double the national unemployment rate, typically inner city or sometimes rural settings, then they cut the dollar amount in half, and they cut the employment creation number in half. So you're down to $500,000 and 5 jobs. And there's even a third category where you're just for a troubled business. So
was it the EB-5 that Snyder set up to try to lure 50,000 high-educated people from around the planet, students?
Yes and no. It was part of that program, but his initiatives is even beyond that.
Okay. And is it only Detroit? I mean,
That's what they're targeting, but they have a long way to go to get that passed
it
into
seems
law.
like it'd be advantageous for Grand Rapids to have.
Yeah, I don't know why we wouldn't want to do that. Right.
Okay.
So just to put some numbers behind that too, and I think it was Cindy that mentioned these quotas. This is just a page from the Visa Bulletin. If you want to check yourself, you can go to this website. It's literally a monthly bulletin by the U.S. Department of State. It is controlling as to who can complete this permanent resident process. So to make some sense of these letters and numbers, if you can read it here. So we have these classifications. So first preference, second preference, all the way down to fifth preference. So first preference happens to be our aliens of extraordinary ability, outstanding researchers, and outstanding faculty. And as you can see, not only do they get first preference, but limited numbers apply, and the C means current, meaning there are visas currently available for every country. The reason China, India, Mexico, and Philippines are listed separately is because they have high rates of immigration, and they exhaust their per country quota, so we track them separately. It's literally, you could say, a line. The line, though, is there is no line for that first preference for any country. But when we get to second preference, that's advanced degreed professionals. So masters or higher, so physicians, or a job that requires a bachelor's plus 5 years progressive experience. So most countries that doesn't apply, but our physicians and researchers from China, this is 15th of March 2010 is what that means. So meaning those individuals that their companies filed that labor certification with the Department of Labor prior to or as of March 15, 2010, they can now begin that adjustment or counselor processing, the background check. So they've been waiting 4+ years, 4.5 years, and only now. Now it changes month to month, but you get the idea. Sometimes it leaps forward several years, sometimes it retrogresses and goes backwards several years. India, high rates of immigration. So our physician friends from India, we see lots of physicians and IT people from India. So our more advanced IT people, their second preference, yes, you're reading that right, that's an 05. So 2005. It's not exactly a 10-year wait, because if I show you, this is the next month bulletin. It's published almost 3.5 weeks ahead of time. If we go to October 2014, the beginning of the fiscal year, the government fiscal year, you may recall, begins in October. India was at May of 09. So at the beginning of our current fiscal year, the line was May of 2000 now. And then here we are, not even, I guess, almost 6 months in the year, it's retrogressed. Because every month they're measuring, so to speak, how is this line moving, and it's a fixed number per year, so they have to adjust it. Now some people have said, I give up, I'm not coming. Some people are disqualified because of immigration violations, criminal history. Some people say, or I married a U.S. citizen, I don't need to be in that line anymore. There is no line if you're married to a U.S. citizen. And it jumps around. If we look at July of 2014, you can see India progress. So last summer, it progressed to September of 08. So it's not a guess. It's a very complicated math formula. I don't want to bore you with the details. If you go to that Visa Bulletin page, there's a short summary of it. I rely on my software. I get a list every month of who I can tell can go to the final stage. But in one takeaway here, and maybe incentive for all you to write Congress to fix this, is people are frustrated by this. Businesses frustrated by this. I could spend the rest of the afternoon giving you local examples of companies that said, if that's what I have to deal with, we'll open up the IT center in India. And they've done that. And that's just local companies. I mean, Bill Gates has gone to Congress, I've lost count, and he's put thousands of jobs overseas, because if I can't bring the people here, then I have to put the jobs over there. So that's what we're doing to ourselves. I'm not dismissing that there's a problem at the borders, especially the southern borders. I'm not dismissing that we shouldn't be concerned of people coming across the borders, but we're very short, highly skilled foreign nationals and we're, not having an intelligent debate of what we should do to fix it. And it's hurting all of our, and not just our economy, but, just do a little bit of research on the physician shortage. The reason you can't get in to see your specialist is we can't get enough of them in here.
At the same time allowing unions, so.
Yeah, the reality is, the comment was about the illegal. Many of these illegals now are actually from India. That's been the highest growth number. The Mexico foreign nationals that are illegally here is actually at historic lows. India, and we had a lot of people that lost their jobs in India, became out of status, they didn't want to go back. So they stayed here. So it's kind of this new population of undocumented that are actually highly educated. They just fell out of status. And so I actually have a list of who's out of status and under DAPA who we may be able to help. So, this is the major frustration, and we are losing jobs. People do have opportunities, and they're not coming to the United States because they know it's a 10-year wait. Yeah.
Can I just mention, I know that we're short on high-skilled labor, but we also have a huge shortage of labor
Low
for people
skilled,
to
yeah.
pick our fruits and vegetables. We have a 20% loss on produce because we can't get enough workers here to pick. We basically won't have food if people don't show up and pick it.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. If you talk to the Michigan Ag Society, they cite figures of multi-million-dollar losses in our crops because we didn't have the workers available
I
in
did
the
take
field.
pictures. The apples fell off the trees and they were rotting all over the ground.
Yeah.
Yeah, we had, where our cottage is, a lot of farmers just stopped. They just let their fields go because they didn't have anybody to pick the field. It's terrible.
Yeah, exactly. So it certainly is a broken system, and so now that we're beyond our election year, cautiously optimistic that maybe we can get beyond it. But if nothing else, do write your congressman. They do listen. And I think they just need that political courage to do something about it, because it is a thorny issue. Yes, there's coming.
Well, I just am confused by the dates going backwards. What's not making sense to me is if it advanced to like 09, wouldn't everybody be approved up through 09 then? So how can it go backwards then?
Because it's a set fixed number. So if you're confused, you're not alone. So what happens is it has to be current when you file. So literally something called an application to adjust status. So if you were in our database, we'd be watching this number. If it was current in February, we would tell you, go get your medical exam, yes, you don't get fingerprinted until I tell you to say so. Go get your medical exam. We'll fill out this application for you. We send it in. And we got the whole month to fill it in. They can't take it away the opportunity to fill it in or to file it. Then, when they do your background check, you also have to be current when they complete everything. So if it retrogresses, if your priority date, you happen to be from China, and you had this July 09 priority date, we filed this next month, and it goes backwards because a whole bunch of people filed, you're just waiting till your priority date becomes current. And so you could be waiting a long, long time. I have he's actually a nuclear physicist from China by way of Canada. He lived in Canada, was born in China. So you're chargeable by country of birth. He's a Canadian passport holder, but born in China. It's country of birth under the 1965 laws. So we were able to file last summer for him, but now we're just waiting because he's an 08 priority date because he was current for a while and then it closed. So we're just waiting. I can keep extending his H-1B. I think we're in year 8 now. Yeah, it gets to be frustrating. So it moves back and forth. You have to be current when you file and current when you adjust status to the permanent residence. So the recent executive action, let's kind of jump into that because this could be new work for all of you, new opportunities for you. So we had DACA that's now 2 years old, deferred action for certain childhood arrivals. And by childhood, these are people that had to be under 30, but many of them are working and employed. That's the other kind of great maybe myth. There's about $80-some billion in the Social Security Suspense Fund. That's an old number, meaning the most common way to get a job is they get fraudulent Social Security numbers real numbers, just don't belong to them, and work and pay into it, because employers have to pay into it. And then our Social Security figures out, well, we have a John Corrido in West Michigan, we have a John Corrido in Southern California. I don't get to keep the money. They figure it out and put it in a suspense fund. Hopefully the San Diego money, not my money. And then they get to keep it after a period of time. So we have DACA, Deferred Action for Certain Child Arrivals.
Get to keep it after a amount of time
The government
their
does.
return.
Yes, yes.
Only
Or
if
if they get to be legal someday, we actually track all the old Social Security numbers, show them that they're now a permanent resident, and get credit for that prior payments. If they don't have all those fake numbers, then they have to go back and pay all those withholdings. So DAPA is the expansion of the parents of U.S. citizens. So if you have somebody undocumented who was here legally but overstayed, or never was legal to begin with, or came on that visitor visa and then just decided, I'm not going back. DAPA, we're waiting for all the criteria and all the lawsuits to be settled, but DAPA would allow yet another class that in essence what we're saying is you're undocumented or illegal, but you're not a risk. You don't have a criminal history. You have an educational background. Many may be employed already. We're not going to take the time, money, and effort to deport you. And I heard on NPR today, they're estimating that number is as high as 5.5 million. 5.5 million people. So they'll get a work authorization card as a result of DAPA. They'll be able to get driver's license. They'll be able to. The idea is we have people who really aren't a threat. Many of them actually are homeowners. Many of them are working here. Let's get them out of the proverbial shadows. And then, even if you're an enforcement first proponent, what's left is the people we all really should be concerned about, the true criminals. Let's focus our money and resources at those who do have criminal histories and we really don't want here in the U.S. That's the theory. But the takeaway is you're going to see people. Again, we don't need you to be immigration agents. You don't need to do an investigation. But if somebody volunteers or tells you, well, what is this DAPA? What's this card? Why is it a 2-year card? That's what we're talking about. And so there's a lot of implementation to be seen. There were some challenges early on by some states. But so far, those challenges have all been thrown out. That's a federal issue, and it's a pretty well vetted, not to get political on you, but whatever political side of the aisle you're on, it's a pretty well established rule that the president does have this executive authority. Deferred action's been around. That's not new. This is just the president saying, here's a large group that I am saying we should defer action. Now, a new president could come in and say, I disagree. And so that's kind of what we're waiting to see about it too.
I think it's one of the reasons I've asked people to encourage them to call Congress about this, because Michigan is one of 25 states suing the
challenge the
president
law, yes.
that is challenging that right now. For my family, that would personally affect us. We own houses, we have a business, and it's very difficult because my husband drives every day without a license, and it's very stressful.
And it's a big group. I mean, you could debate this issue all day. Just before the Christmas holidays, I had to give, accurate, not necessarily good advice that they wanted to hear, to a woman from Canada. She's been in the United States over 25 years. She was a student at Calvin, got married, got divorced, didn't realize, no one told her, that your marriage alone doesn't give you an immigration status. So she never filed. She was remarried. They have children here. She's never been legal, other than when she was a student. Mom was about to die in Canada. She went home to see mom.
Couldn't get back.
Came back through. And they said, well, where's your status? She didn't have one. So I got the call, can you do anything to get my wife back here? And I'd say, no, not short term. We might be able to apply for a waiver. It's going to take well over a year. And he was so distressed. He said, fine, I'm going to sell my house, sell my farm. My kids are all adults. Her dad happens to live in Poland. And so they're going to Poland because they're very liberal immigration laws in Poland. So they're done. I mean, he said, that's what I have to go through, and I had to honestly say the ability to obtain a waiver is slight, not impossible. It's not happening tomorrow. And he said, no,
It's not politically correct to say this, but why didn't she just drive over the border a different day and come back over and stay again?
What you through?
well, you're not gonna be able to drive over it. She may have to swim across or drive across, yeah. Yeah, you're in the system, and if you do it twice, 2 illegal entries is a felony.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
And then they'll incarcerate you. And the immigration detention centers are usually the county jail. You're usually with the general population.
Just an example of how accurate they are about you crossing the border. Back in the late 90s, my son played hockey in Canada for 3 years. We gave him one of our old cars, but it was still registered in my name. He was living up in Toronto. My wife and I went up to Port Huron to visit. As we're going into Canada, and we got stopped to ask, well, how long we're going to be there and everything else. And looked at their computer screen and said, well, you're already here, sir. I said, no, because they have the camera on the back of your car. So, well, it's already registered, and you're up here and blah, blah, on the street in Toronto. I said, that's my son, he has our old car, it's registered my name. She said, how long are you going to be here? And we went on and through it, but they do keep track of you, so there is no just driving across the
I
border.
haven't been through the border in a while, but they never checked back then.
No, this is, they've been doing it for years. This is 1998, 99, so
Yeah.
it had nothing to do with 9/11. It was just, they've been very fastidious, but they do have a very good, worker program going.
Yeah, I didn't want to make this into a political discussion this morning, but it sounds like many of you are already dealing with a fair number of foreign national clients. And it's not an easy thicket to weave your way through. And however your politics feel, I think it just helps to have an understanding of, well, why is someone concerned? Should they be concerned? What's DAPA? Am I going to get in trouble if I'm helping someone, buy or sell? Or my example there, if somebody says I'm about to move to Poland because I can't get my wife here, it's not illegal to help them out. It doesn't have to be a fire sale. Many of you know you can do a power of attorney, and so he was all worried, because he's illegal too. I'm like, when did you buy this house? He bought it a long time ago. He had legal documents. He was actually a temporary agriculture worker, so he has a valid Social Security card. He's just well overstayed. I said, no, they can't take away your house. I can't get you back into the country, but they can't take away your house. So work with a good realtor. If you need a power of attorney, we can get you one of those, and and sell it in due course. So that's hopefully maybe I know it was a quick discussion. We've actually been over time, but it gives you maybe a better foundation of what you may be hearing and how you can or should react to it. Hopefully identified some opportunities for you for your professional endeavors. Andy and I have a little bit of time yet. I don't know if the room is otherwise spoken for, but thanks for letting us come today. Maybe last, there are some pretty good resources. You can always call us, but there's some pretty good resources. In the Michigan Office for New Americans, it's gotten some publicity. That's our own Bing Goy from Eastern Floral that opened that. And that they have some great resources as well, just to help people get established. I would highly recommend that website and that organization. Thank you all.